the future inevitably requires both, right? If I look out into the wilderness behind my house and I ask how many of these species will evolve into something else and how many will perish, tough to say, but it's pretty safe to say a little bit of both of those are going to happen.
I think maybe the future of Netflix is you just describe what you want to see, and
A
there you
hundred
go.
percent.
A
A
brand new,
hundred percent.
show. It's, one of one generated. I think for businesses at large, the implications are going to affect every type of role, whether it's finance, whether it's marketing, whether it's design, whether it's development. Every type of role is going to be augmented with these models, if not completely replaced. How do I do the things that these AI systems can't do? And there will always be a need for that because these AI systems are going to put out the output, which is average on not only what it was grounded on, like your current code base, but also what it was trained on.
Tsavo, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Dan, what's going on? Thanks for having me.
Good to have you back, and good to be able to unpack a topic we kind of teed up the last time we chatted, which is the future of sort of developers and engineers. There was a lot of noise about Devin when it was launched, not all that recently. There was a lot of activity around sort of layoffs and this kind of great thinning. I think maybe some of that is still sort of happening here. Talk about what's currently going on with developers and what it looks like to think about building a career in this space where both automation and augmentation are becoming really commonplace.
Yeah, I think that we're gonna unpack a couple interesting things, and you mentioned Devin there, which is really starting to stir up a lot of conversation in the wild.
Yep.
I think there's kind of like two camps, right? And this is specific to developer tools right now, where you have these like fully autonomous agents, right? And that's camp number one, where you're seeing a lot of companies really just like dive into, is it possible to fully automate and replace the roles of certain developers today, right? And whether that's a full stack developer building an end-to-end application, or whether that's a developer working on CI/CD, building DevOps systems, they are looking at, are these systems powerful enough, and can they be kind of orchestrated in a way that effectively does what a developer does. And then you have the other camp, which is kind of the camp that we're in. So I'll try not to have too much confirmation bias, but
Yeah.
it's the camp that says, hey, look, we understand the role of the developer is changing, but is it really changing to the point where it's non-existent, and they're becoming extinct? Or is it changing in the point where they're becoming more cross-functional and they're deeply augmented with these developer tools? And I think that it comes down to one small fundamental principle, right, that we build up the argument from, and that is developers are working on more faster, right? And so, I always talk about this. My role as a developer has dramatically changed in the past like 2 to 3 years, right? And a couple of years ago, I might have been able to write code on a couple of languages, right? So maybe it was like TypeScript and Go and Dart. And now with the advent of these AI systems, I can write code for every team in our company, right? I can write code on Rust, Dart, Go, TypeScript, HTML, CSS, you name it, even Kotlin, right? I can move around a lot faster. And so I'm becoming a lot more cross-functional. And, my role is becoming a bit more like a Swiss Army knife, right? Where I'm spending less time going deep within one particular kind of area, one particular language, and I'm starting to move faster across the org, right? And so just basically what that means is now I'm dealing with more languages, more sets of documentation, more projects, and more teams, right? And so, it's not just, my couple of languages and the projects that are written in that, those languages, and the docs and the kind of, stuff I'm doing in the browser related to all that. It's now that plus, basically a multiplier, right? And so I think like that's really, really going to have an impact on how much context switching a developer has to do and what their day to day looks like. It's going to be a lot more jumping around.
There's so much to dive into here, Tsavo, and it really resonates with me in terms of going back 6, 7 years, thinking about sort of what are the more and less automatable jobs. And by the way, 6, 7 years ago, I don't think engineer was even on the list
No,
for
yeah,
most people.
yeah,
So that just goes to show how challenging this stuff is to predict. But I had sort of tried to encapsulate some of this stuff under the term context 6 or 7 years ago, where context is like, okay, if I'm the guy in the warehouse that sort of just manages our levels of inventory at any given time and tries to predict inventory, maybe there's a machine that just does that in
Sure.
a couple months.
Yeah.
But if I'm the guy who is looking at inventory levels, looking at our manufacturing and production processes, and then also looking at marketing, because how much we sell is going to affect inventory. It's like the biggest effector of sort of how much we have sitting around in inventory. If I'm orchestrating between those different teams in order to manage financial flows and kind of growth in an orchestrated and powerful way, it's probably very, very hard to automate me in that case. I have a
Right.
lot of cross functional knowledge. And by the time an AI can do that, we have bigger concerns than employment. We have species dominance sort of questions on the table. What you're talking about is basically that context question happening with developers. I'm going to try to nutshell this, and I'd love for
Yeah.
you to unpack this for the audience because I think people have to prepare for the future that we're walking into here.
Right.
You're mentioning, hey, you'll be less of sort of the master of this set of documents and this set of very narrow requirements because a system will be able to drill through, drink in all of that, and produce code that's kosher with all of it
That's right.
in somewhat of a snap. Your job will more be okay, assuming that stuff kind of becomes easy, where does that fit into what the product teams are working on? Where
That's
does
right.
that fit into what we're forecasting in this part of the business, et cetera? So it's almost like, and I'd love for you to nutshell it better than me, but I'm thinking about this like you're almost the orchestrator and commander of certain technical tasks in line with sort of a business mandate, and less the person really banging out the ones and zeros in the linear algebra in order to get the job done. Is this the right way to think about it?
Yeah, I think that, basically developers have to look up from their keyboard now, right? And
Ah,
like that's kind of the best way I can put it, where it's like, all right, what are the users asking
whoa,
for? What are the investors asking for? What is marketing and product looking for? Right. And then how does that distill down into the tasks that I can delegate to an AI system, or I can do 2 times faster with an AI system, or I have to do myself, right? And what we're going to see very quickly is that, kind of that look up from the keyboard, metaphor, if you will, is that developers are going to become a lot more integrated with what we're building and why, not necessarily how we build it, right? And so, that moving up from like, all right, I'm writing a ton of code in this very specific section, to like, what are we actually trying to build at large? What's going on with this team and that team and that team? That's really where the role of the developer is going to start to move very quickly. Then there is this other role where, the technical debt is still going to be a large challenge, right? And so in the development world, you're always trying to like abstract. You're trying to reduce code. You're trying to reduce points of failure, reduce security, kind of points of I guess like defensibility, if you will. And so you're like, how do I do the things that these AI systems can't do? And there will always be a need for that, because these AI systems are going to put out the output, which is average on not only what it was grounded on, like your current code base, but also what it was trained on. Right. And so we don't have, for example, a curated data set and a trained model on every 10x developer out there. What we do have is a trained model on every developer out there and every kind of code base out there. And so if you look at everything, maybe only 10% of developers today are truly like 10x. They're truly world class. They're really, really good at their craft. But the middle of that bell curve, is about the 60% of code that's represented in these
yep,
models. And that's just okay code. But naturally, that has a lot of bias. It has a lot of technical debt. And the techniques that are built into these models that are then used to generate new code, a lot of that needs to be kind of double checked. It needs to be refined. It needs to be consolidated. And unless you have a model that can ingest a 10 million, 100 million line code base and say, hey, all of this can be abstracted, and oh, by the way, it's not going to break. We're going to need these really world class engineers in there alongside these AI systems to kind of double check it, to refine it, to upgrade it, and make sure that they're behaving properly, right? So
yeah.
that's my take.
Well, let's poke into it because I think there's a lot here. You know, I hope that, to your point, there will always be a need. Man, always is really, really tough looking forward 20 years. But I do think certainly in the near term, I mean, we can't drop really talented human developers. I mean, it's just no questions asked. They're going to be the ones steering the ship here, and leading things to where they need to go. Um, but that does bring us to a good point. So much more is being made. You said, hey, we care about what we're doing a little bit more than how. Of course, if we don't look under the hood for long enough, we might end up with so much spaghetti that it
That's
becomes
right.
really hard to manage this from a energy standpoint. It becomes a technical kludge. We have bugs that are like almost impossible to dissect. We would hope that AI would be able to sort of annotate and do other things really well. But maybe talk a little bit about, we think about the next couple of years forward as vastly more code is made in the I care about if it works, less about sort of exactly how it's written. As that becomes the norm and we're doing so much more, who are these humans that are looking under the hood? Is it the humans that are commanding the things they want to get done? Do they have to set aside time each week to actually pause, look under the hood, make sure
Yeah.
nothing's overtly wrong, go through a checklist? Or is it another separate team that handles this? This is a very major shift in sort of how code is written. How do you foresee it rolling out?
I actually see that, I actually see the role of developers like basically, if you were an average developer today, with these AI tools, you have the capacity to become a 10x developer faster, right? So you can upskill faster.
Yeah.
We need these average developers to upskill because the only tasks that they're going to really, really be able to contribute to are those really hard tasks. That's not like, okay, we need this boilerplate code written or we need this generic feature implemented. It's like, we got to go solve this security problem. We got to go solve this, kind of this technical debt problem or this efficiency problem, right? Where they're very specific. And so you're going to see like a lot more of like these problem solvers, right? Which are, inherently represented in the 10x developer community, where they're really good at coming in, not understanding anything, quickly coming up to speed and solving really hard problems in creative, abstract ways, right? And that is, even the best models in the world are not there yet, right? The best models in the world maybe represent junior and intermediate developers. And so I think that there's going to be this bifurcation of people that upskill into the 10x range and can do things that are just simply not possible yet with these AI systems. And then there's going to be the range where they didn't upskill fast enough and they're going to have to find new roles, right? And it's going to be as simple as that. And so I think that, this will continue for new grads coming out of school, by the way, because you do have very gifted computer scientists coming out of school.
Certainly.
And
Certainly.
with the augmentation, of these tools and in their role, they can come up to speed and they can problem solve creatively very, very quickly. But I actually do think that, to this note of like spaghetti code, if you think about it, like you take a 10x developer, you put them into a code base that was written, and it's a very average code base, and it's going to take them a while to even digest what this spaghetti code is, let alone come up with a solution to start solving it.
Yeah.
And if it takes a 10x developer a couple of months to do that, right, then to kind of like unpack it, reorganize it, kind of prepare it and all that, imagine how long it's going to take an AI system that produced the spaghetti code to do that, right? It's inherently not necessarily possible at this point in time. And so, when we talk about the qualification of models to do that type of thing, they're going to have massive context windows. They're going to have to be a trillion plus parameters, right? And they're going to have to be, able to have the entire knowledge of like not only the code base, but how it was formed, the problems that were solved, the product features that were trying to be built, and the end user in mind, right? And that's what happens when you have these 10x engineers is they have all those stakeholders and all those inputs in mind, and then they build. And so I think like we're just
Yeah.
not there yet. So, in short, to kind of put a bow on it, I think that
Yeah.
you either kind of evolve into a 10x developer that complements AI and knows how to use these augmentative tools to move faster in different kind of environments, right? Problem solving unique cases all the time, or you're going to kind of drop off and you're going to maybe go and work in a different part of the company, right?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me like, you know, uh, eh, you can embrace this technology, and part of that is going to involve, like you had said, pulling your head off the keyboard,
Yeah.
and really, maybe the developers tuned in can be asking themselves, um, am I a mile deep in some narrow niche area of specific code around payment fraud? And is there a way where I could be a bigger part of sort of how strategy is developed, about how this ties into user experience, about, other elements, the real problems we're solving, the overall commander's intent for serving the market and improving efficiencies, as opposed to just solving these niche concerns? Because from what you're telling us here, Tsavo, there's not as much future in those dark corners.
Yeah, and the phase one of that though is, for those developers out there, like when you're in that like kind of like deep, like water, if you will, the first thing that you should ask yourself is, am I spending most of the time trying to figure out how to solve this? And if so, can I use generative AI to solve this faster? Right? Because if you're trying to like figure out the solution and upskill yourself and go out and read documentation and talk to people and then solve it, odds are generative AI has that information packed into it. You can ask it a couple questions and you can be on your way faster, right? So learning to like identify when it is ideal to use these tools is really important. Like, hey, I found myself, I can do this faster with AI. Let me go and ask ChatGPT. Let me go and ask Bard or ask Pieces or whatever else. Or do you find yourself like uniquely, we're talking like pencil and paper, implementing an algorithm that's super, super unique and specialized, and won't be, kind of possible to be generated on demand by a system, right? And that's where we're talking about, someone who's deep in the Windows world and solving a bug that came from Windows XP and is now present in Windows 11, right? God bless those Windows engineers. It's like yeah, their domain expertise is like it's theirs, right? Odds are, ChatGPT and the likes are not, well versed in that super specific world, and so that's where it is okay to stay. But if you find yourself where you're like, hey, look, I know there's a million other people that have built a CI/CD pipeline out there, or there's a million other people that have built a web app. At that point, don't try and figure it out. Like, go and ask a large language model to kind of move you along faster, right? And so if you become good at utilizing these tools and identifying when they're best to be utilized, you're going to move faster, right? And that's how you upgrade into that 10x is you just you know what problems to solve yourself and what problems to kind of outsource to these generative models, right?
Yeah, I think these are crucial kind of career decisions for the developers tuned in. I think there's some who are listening now who in the next 18 months are going to go way deeper and harder into a specific niche problem that probably OpenAI has not trained a lot on.
Right.
And then there's others who are going to pull their head off of the keyboard and say, how can I tie these skills to broader business strategy and become embedded and context aware in a way that allows me to go beyond what these models can do today? And I think both of those paths should be open to people. And there's a really strong takeaway from the episode itself. Tsavo, I know that's all we have for time on this one, but appreciate you being back here with us and glad to connect.
Always good topics. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate you.